As they say in hockey, let's do that hockey.
Play a full 60 minutes.
Yeah, I'm just trying to keep it simple.
Get pucks deep, putting the puck deep.
Put pucks in deep.
We got to keep it simple and just get pucks going forward.
Getting into the forecheck.
We got to keep playing aggressive.
Trying to take away their time and space.
We're focused on tonight. We just got to stick to our game.
NHL dreams are in progress. The NHL draft has just completed, and it's time for the free agency frenzy. All kinds of players that we're used to seeing in certain jerseys are going to be going across the country to different locations. And joined by Colin Kapur to talk about it, I'm Casey Ditzel. Welcome back to the Fifth Liners Hockey Podcast here. And Colin, been a couple episodes since we've been able to catch up with you in an extremely busy summer, but you're out killing it on ESPN. How's it been going on the baseball front? You said it's a little less exciting than what we're covering here today.
Yeah, a little bit less exciting than hockey, but great to be back here. Great to be, working full time this summer. It's been fun over here in Wisconsin, but so much to break down here, Casey. You mentioned free agency frenzy. I mean, you look down for 1 second, there's another blockbuster trade happening over here. You look away for a second, there's a free agent signing somewhere else. There's a huge draft pick being made. It's been a fun couple of days here in the NHL.
So we're going to go right into the draft, and that seems to be where the most recent stretch of big-time trades. The first round was just a couple of draft picks going back and forth. Then all of a sudden, day two, and specifically round two, some big-name players that got dealt, and it started with Utah dealing with Tampa Bay. They send Connor Geekie, J.J. Moser, and a 2025 second-rounder, as well as this year's fourth-round pick for Mikhail Sergachev. Tampa Bay dishing out quite a bit of cap space. They also made a deal with the LA Kings. Tanner Jeannot is headed to LA, and Tampa got a couple of draft picks there. So some of the speculation up in the air about rumors to Jake Gensel potentially for Carolina, although there was also rumors that Carolina had an offer on the deal for him at an 8x8 that he had agreed to. It still has not been signed. By the time this drops on Monday morning, maybe that's happened, but there's also now some rumblings that it could be Gensel going to Tampa. A lot of cap space now available with that trade. Also, Steven Stamkos offered a 3x3 million, and that wasn't good enough for his camp. So could we see the captain heading to free agency here?
Absolutely. I mean, this was a really interesting trade. I mean, it allows the Lightning to get younger. Obviously, you mentioned the players coming back in return. Connor Geekie is going to be a big part of that. The draft capital is a big part of it as well. I think for Utah, they got a good end of this bargain as well. I mean, Sergachev, if he is fully healthy coming into this season, remember he missed, I think 80 days, something like that, with that big injury last season. If he is fully healthy, he's going to be a big part of this Utah Hockey Club. We don't know their name, although I think Bill Armstrong may have spoiled that it's the Utah Yetis. Maybe that was just kind of a Freudian slip there. Who knows? But if the Utah Hockey Club can get a healthy Sergachev, that's going to be a really great impact ad for them. It's also a splash for a new team that they kind of needed a splash, right? They had the most cap space available, and they got a great player if he is fully healthy. So I like this deal for both teams. And you mentioned the Stamkos aspect of all of it as well. The Lightning are a core that is getting older. So, moving off of Sergachev and getting younger is smart. And if Stamkos, that deal was just laughable. I mean, 3x3 is ridiculous for Stamkos and well within his rights. And, you applaud him for rejecting that one. If he tests the open waters and he gets something else, it's going to be weird to see him if he does don another jersey next season, Casey.
Familiar names going back and forth with each other. Tanner Jeannot, another trade I'm very fond of for Tampa Bay. Losing him, well, it'll be interesting to see. He was an impact player there, and I think that's a great pickup for LA on a trade that I'm excited to talk to you about that we covered in one of the previous episodes heading to your team. But your Washington Capitals, another very active team. They pick up a goaltender from Vegas, getting Logan Thompson. They also trade with Buffalo, sending back Malenstein and picking up the 43rd overall pick. For that, they get Cole Hudson. You're very excited about those trades.
Absolutely. I think for Washington, what I really was excited about after last year, and we talked about this in our last episode, I was impressed with what they were able to do last year, but they needed impact. They needed people that can go in and actually score a lot of goals. This was a team that averaged the least amount of goals per game of any playoff team this past season. And Dylan Strome burst onto the scene. That was great. But outside of him and Ovi, there wasn't really anyone who was taking over shifts and scoring goals. And now, with Pierre-Luc Dubois, with Andrew Mangiapane, these are two players that are going to be right in the top six for Washington. Mangiapane may be in the third line. I think he's going to elevate up to the top six as the season goes on. I think PLD is going to insert right in with Alex Ovechkin at the start of the year. And I was back and forth on this Pierre-Luc Dubois trade when I first saw it. The first things first, I was like super surprised. I was like, this isn't like the Caps to make a blockbuster deal right out of nowhere here. I wasn't expecting them to do anything like this. And then I read, he's been kind of a bounce around type player. I think he started with Winnipeg or Columbus, if I'm not mistaken. Either of those two. Then he bounced to the other. Then he bounced to LA. He spent 1 year there. And now he's here in Washington. So, I hope that experience has kind of matured him as a player. There were those videos of him in LA when he's off the puck, he's not doing anything. He's kind of lackadaisical with it. You hope the influence of Ovechkin will kind of cure that with Luc Dubois. But if he actually can activate his skill set, he's still young. He has a crazy amount of finesse and skill. He can absolutely be a great playmaker with Ovechkin on a line, with Strome on a line. He should be the next Evgeny Kuznetsov for the Capitals. And being the next Evgeny Kuznetsov comes with the good and the bad of what Kuzi brought to Washington. So that's going to be really interesting. But I think overall, you get rid of Darcy Kemper's cap hit. You add in an extra $3 million on the cap with Dubois' contract. I don't love that, but look, you got to make splashes in the NHL. And if this one pays off, it's going to pay off for the Caps. And then up and down, I think Cole Hudson, that trade was, an absolute fleece job of Buffalo. Like, Beck Malenstein's a good player. He's a fourth line grinder. Like, the Caps have 10 of those players in Hershey right now that just won the Calder Cup. They can call up anyone and replace Beck Malenstein's penalty killing and fourth line prowess. But what they're not going to be able to replace is a guy like Cole Hudson, who outscored two of the top NTDP products that got drafted in the top 5 or top 10 of this NHL draft. And he's a defender. And I'm really excited about Cole Hudson. I'm going to see him at BU, I believe, this upcoming season when Northeastern plays them. So I'm going to be excited for that. And Hudson, like his brother Lane, he honestly is profiled a little bit better. He's a little bit younger. Obviously, he's got more time to develop, and I believe he's projected to be a little bit bigger. So that's going to be really exciting for the Caps. I really, really, really like what they've been able to do. It's not like Washington to be wheeling and dealing here on draft day. And I think it shows a new direction for the team. And I think what I talked about in our last episode, Casey, was that Spencer Carberry got the best out of not much. Now he's getting players. Now he's getting a lot to work with. He is the guy that I think can get the best out of Pierre-Luc Dubois, can get the best out of Mangiapane, and their new goaltender, Logan Thompson, as well, from Vegas, who was good in Vegas. I think 2.7 goals allowed, something to that extent, and he's going to be the backup to Charlie Lindgren, and that's another high-quality goaltending tandem for Washington.
And I saw Cole Hudson play last year when the development team came up to Clarkson, along with our episode 3 guest, Christian Humphreys. Congratulations to him on being drafted to the Colorado Avalanche, but you're going to get very familiar with them. Headed to BU with quite a bit of talent off that development roster.
Yeah.
And potentially Macklin Celebrini coming back. He left it up in the air in round 1 in his interview on whether or not he was going to become a Shark immediately. Vegas sends Logan Thompson for draft picks, but immediately they get a goaltender back. Akira Schmid and Alexander Holtz come over from New Jersey. Vegas sends Paul Cotter to the Devils. The Devils also in a trade with Utah, they give John Marino to the hockey club and get picks back. The Devils, another one of those teams clearing up some cap space there. Vegas gets a good backup goaltender for Aiden Hill there. And the Devils now potentially have room linked to some other Carolina Hurricanes names. Brett Pesce, one of the ones they're allegedly all in, potentially trying to sign the pairing of Pesce and Shea.
Yeah, a lot of intrigue going on here. I like that there's so many kind of intertwined trades between each team. Everyone is kind of giving up something, getting back something in a different deal, right? A lot of teams are making multiple trades in these past 2 days, which I really like. And Pesci, you mentioned with Brady Shea, like these are guys that are obviously known quantities here in the NHL, and the Devils need that, right? They had a really disappointing year this past year, and Kira Schmid was great that one playoff run a couple of years ago, and then he kind of fell off the wagon a little bit for the Devils. So now he's going to have a fresh start in Vegas, where he's going to be the backup to Aiden Hill, to your point, but there's always opportunities to become a starting goaltender in the NHL. So I like these trades too. I think it just goes to show like the NHL is like, this is really exciting stuff that we're seeing here. A lot of players moving around, and we're going to have a lot to talk about come the start of the season. A lot of storylines here. We mentioned the Caps with Luc Dubois. I think that's one of the biggest ones. Macklin Celebrini, another huge storyline. All sorts of things with the goaltending in Vegas, and what are the Devils going to do? Where is Jake Gensel going to go? Like we mentioned, a lot of excitement happening across the NHL, and this is something that, maybe it is quite common in the NHL. I don't usually think of the NHL like a league that has these kind of deals every single year and every single free agency and draft season. So it is pretty cool to see.
We're going to go through all 32 teams here, and the reason it is our free agency super show. Walk through the UFAs and the RFAs here, what the cap space is, and maybe throw out some names, try to throw some darts here so that we can cut and paste some clips here when some players start signing. But one big thing that I had to do some research in to explain to the viewers here is RFAs versus UFAs, and obviously RFAs are restricted free agents. That's some ownership to the team, so the team has the first option to own that player. And Marty Necas is a player we'll get into. Players have the option to try to get traded. They don't have to necessarily return back to the team. They also have the option, if the team will not give up the contract, to sit out the following year. Other teams, after it gets here to July 1st, which is coming up, if the RFAs have not been signed, similar to a UFA, the team can sign them before July 1st. It's all set and done. After July 1st, arbitration starts, which is one of the least player-friendly processes as they try to negotiate a proper price. But other teams also have the option to throw an offer sheet to try to steal players from another team. So if I was to offer $5 million to Colin on top of his 2.5 RFA contract,
I'll take it.
And he's going to take it from me. His team, the Washington Capitals, now has to either match it or go above it to keep Colin on his side. The way it works, if my team ends up stealing Colin, there's some compensation involved. If it's under $1.5 million, no compensation. If it's between $1.5 and $2.29 million, it's a third round pick. $2.3 million to $4.58 is a second round pick. Anything between $4.5 million and $7 million, you have to give up a first and a third round. Between $6.8 million and $9.2 million is a first, a second, and a third round. Anything above a $9 million contract would be two firsts, a second, and a third. Very unlikely that happens. Only twice since 1990 has an RFA offer not been matched by the same team. That was 2007, Dustin Pennick, taken by Edmonton from Anaheim. 2021, Kasperi Kokoniemi, taken by Carolina from Montreal, and has not worked out for the Carolina Hurricanes. We're going to start in the East. We're going to go through the Metro in order of points. Then we're going to then go to the Atlantic, then the Central, and then the Pacific. 32 teams up, and we'll start here with the New York Rangers, Colin, the President's Trophy winners, 114 points. They have 19 of 23 contracts signed right now and $10.5 million of cap space going into the offseason. 5 UFAs, Jack Roslovic, Alex Wenberg, Blake Wheeler. Those are forwards. Defensemen, Eric Gustafson and Chad Rudwell. And their RFAs, Capo Caco was one. He's now signed to a 1-year, $2.4 million prove-it deal. They also have Braden Schneider and Ryan Lindgren, who are both defensemen as RFAs. Colin, this season obviously successful for the New York Rangers, but they couldn't quite get over that hump the second out of the past 2 years that they've been knocked out in the Eastern Conference Final.
Yeah, they struggled obviously in the playoffs, Casey. When you look up and down this list, it's interesting because it's none of the core guys. But then you look at next year, there's guys like Shesterkin and Lafreniere that are on the UFA and RFA list respectively. So this is the time where they have this window that's still wide open for this core. We talked about Zibanejad before and Artemi Panarin and Keandre Miller, obviously. So when it comes to these guys on the list, I mean, none of them are going to be big splashes. Blake Wheeler produced in his role last year. He got hurt throughout the season. Jack Roslovic produced in the playoffs for the Rangers. So I expect them to get Roslovic back at the very least. When it comes to the rest of the guys on the list, do they really matter? Kind of, but not as much as the core guys that we've talked about. So for the Rangers, there's projectable assets in here, but I expect them to have to go out and get some new guys, and I think they're not going to sign some of these contracts back.
As you mentioned, a lot of guys that you can fill those spots with other guys around the league in free agency. $10.5 million of cap space, and you talk about Shesterkin, feels like a big year here with the rumors that he could be signing upwards of a $12 million contract, which is just about to put them in cap hell coming up. So, a big year here, and this might have to be the one where they make some big moves to try to win it all and continue on that President's Trophy run. They drafted EJ Emery, another U.S. National Development Team guy, 30th overall in the first round. Carolina Hurricanes were second in the Metro and second in the East as well. 111 points for them. And coming into the offseason, a pretty big list of cap available, but an even bigger list of guys that are probably not going to be coming back here this year. They lost their general manager, Don Waddell. His contract was up coming in July on July 1st. They let him go early. He's now with the Columbus Blue Jackets and has already started wheeling and dealing out there. Eric Tulsky from inside the organization, now the general manager with Carolina. Rod Brindamore signed to a 5-year contract extension, which personally I think is huge to the culture of that team. And the rumors that he was going to leave, I think, would have absolutely decimated the possibility of them returning as a strong threat next year. But you look at the list that I'm about to read off here. Jake Gensel, who they made the big move at the deadline, a free agency, or unrestricted free agent, excuse me. Rumors that they offered him an 8x8. It has not been signed to this point. They made him available for a mid-round pick to have the signing rights. Nobody made that trade, so he's still up in the air on whether or not he'll get to July 1st. Marty Necas is an impending RFA, and a lot of talk around trade. His dad has been very outspoken in the media, which is an extremely interesting situation about trying to get him out of there. And Necas has not said similar things, but it sounds like he'll be on the move. Teuvo Teravainen, Stefan Nason, Jordan Martinook, all forwards that are UFAs. Jalen Chatfield, they signed to a 3x3 million deal, which is an absolute steal, I think, for the value he brings. But also on the defensive core, Tony DeAngelo is up, Brett Pesce, and Brady Shea all to be gone. Seth Jarvis, Jack Drury, Max Comtois, and Dylan Coughlin are all RFAs. So an absolute mess for Eric Tulsky to take over here. I think it's got to start with Seth Jarvis probably there. And then somehow they have to figure out how to come up with a team out of that list of names that are expiring here this season.
Yeah, there's so many names to juggle here for Tulsky, and it's so interesting. He's in the first season kind of being thrown into the fire for this Hurricanes team. And I think the most intriguing part of this is Martin Necas, because, Tulsky says he's working on it. He wants to get everyone or be in talks with everyone at the very least. But Necas wants out of Carolina. There's hostility there between the two sides. And Necas, who led the team in points a couple of years ago, just doesn't believe that the Canes are offering what he's worth. So this is a guy that offers so much on the ice that the Hurricanes, they don't really love to sign, players for 8 years, 7 years, whatever it is. That's just not kind of their style. And that's why it's so interesting that they offered that to Jake Gensel, because they are the only team that can do that 8th year. But for Necas, you have to assume he's going to go somewhere else, and you have to assume that it's not going to get it done, or the deal's not going to get done for Carolina. So this is the exact opposite of the New York Rangers, right? A team that made the playoffs and was successful, but they are on the verge of losing so much of their core coming up for next season. You mentioned Jalen Chatfield getting signed. I don't Is Jay Gensel going to stay in Carolina? I don't think so. I think there's going to be another offer somewhere else and he's going to go there. Both sides seem to think that they want it to happen. I just, in my gut feeling says it's not going to. And the rest of these names, these are key contributors for this Hurricanes team. So they're going to be in trouble next year. And Eric Tulsky is literally being thrown into the fire here with this thing that he's got to juggle.
They're also in a bit of trouble looking forward to next year too. Slavin, Burns, and Orlov are all up. So pretty much their entire defense in the next 2 years coming up. I think Burns would be closer to retirement there, but Slavin, a guy they want on a long-term contract. So a big time free agency coming up and a big July 1st for Eric Tulsky. I'm right with you. I think Gensel is going to be going somewhere else. Could it be Tampa? Ties to Vancouver, even though they've gone out and signed some big contracts. I think thinking that he was going to go with the 8x8 in Carolina, but we'll find out by the time this show comes out on whether or not he makes it all the way to July 1st. The New York Islanders, the team that I think stole the draft the most out of anybody, and the Islanders, after a 94-point series, third in the Metro, and a disappointing playoff to a very strong Carolina Hurricanes team, they have just $6.2 million of cap space and 8 UFAs: Cal Clutterbuck, Matt Martin, Carson Kuhlman, Brian Pinto, Mike Riley, Sebastian Aho, not the Carolina all-star Sebastian Aho, but defenseman Sebastian Aho, Robert Bortuzzo, and Robin Salo. RFAs: Simon Holstrom, Ruslan Ishikov, Kyle McLean, who they've now signed to a 3-year times $775,000 deal. A great deal for a guy who was productive in the playoffs. And Oliver Wahlstrom and Dennis Cholowski. Again, a long list of guys to figure out, but they do add Cole Yzerman with the 20th overall pick, an absolute steal for the New York Islanders, and a guy who probably not ready this year, but probably in 2 years is a guy who could come right in and score 30 goals for them.
Yeah, that's the steal of this first round, Casey. And there's no question about it for me. When it comes down to it, the Caps were picking ahead of the Islanders, and I saw a tweet that said Yzerman's available, and I was like, oh, great. Yzerman's going to Washington. The next tweet was that the Caps passed on him. The next team passed on him. The next team passed on him. He fell down to 20th overall, and he was in the top 10 a couple of months ago. He was projected to be top 2 right after Celebrini, maybe 6 or 7 months ago. The fall was very unprecedented for Yzerman. There are reports that he's kind of a selfish player. That kind of thing is what gets eliminated when you go to college hockey. The BU culture is going to nip that in the bud if that even is a consideration for Cole Yzerman. We don't really know for sure about his mentality. So I agree with you. I think he goes to BU. He dominates like Macklin Celebrini did. Maybe not to the extent that Macklin did, but he dominates and leads BU to another really successful season. Then right after that, he's going to be a one and done because he's that good of a player. I think that's the story for the Islanders here. The free agents, the cap situation is troublesome for them after the season that they had. They're probably looking at a little bit of a, maybe not a rebuild, but something to the tune of not being as successful as they were last season. But then Yzerman's going to show up. They got some other guys up there in the pipeline developing. This team's going to be good in a couple of years. And this Yzerman pick, like I said before, I'll say it one more time, I think this was the steal of the first round, getting a talent like him at 20th overall.
They got a lot of long-term, big contract guys. It'll be interesting if they can try to work out some trades, maybe a couple buyouts there, which we've seen a few already this season. But for the Islanders, not a lot of cap to work with here this offseason. Probably going to be a pretty quiet team as we get to July 1st and on. Your team up next here. The 4th place in the Metro, second wild card spot after a 91-point season where they snuck in for Alex Ovechkin and his crew. 17 out of 23 roster spots confirmed right now, and just about $5.8 million of available cap. Max Pacioretty expires as well as Nicholas Aube-Kubel on the forward core. Their 2 RFAs were Beck Malenstein. He's now over to the Buffalo Sabres, so that just leaves Connor McMichael. but not much to work with here for this team. And we talked about how active they were on the trade market. That frees up quite a bit now to bring in some talent for a team that needs to find some more offense, even though they were able to squeak into the playoffs.
Yeah, one thing about the cap situation is that TJ Oshie's still taking up some money. If he, the injury consideration with him, if he does go on the LTIR, that's going to free up some space for Washington as well. Overall, I like what they did. Mangiapane probably is a slight overpay. I think he's up in the $4-5 million range for a guy that he should be the top 6, like I said, but we'll see what he gets on the scoring front. The Caps dealt with a similar situation with Connor Brown, who ended up tearing his ACL 2 games into the season a couple of years ago. So I personally hope that it is not the case this year with Mangiapane. I think overall there's a lot of talent on this team, and especially going in the pipeline. I mentioned Hershey winning the Calder Cup again. Hendrix Lapierre was a part of that. He's going to be on the roster from day one. Connor McMichael, I think, needs to be signed and needs to be secured, especially with the development that I've seen and that the team has seen from him over the past 2-3 years. He's been a guy that has been able to actually hold his own in the NHL. Lapierre, the same thing. And I think the Caps are going to be able to field a solid, top 3 lines next season. And then they're going to have that normal 4th grinder line that they always have, because that's just the way that this team operates and the way that this team is built. I'm not really worried about them. The one worry obviously is Pierre-Luc Dubois. How is he going to fare in the Cap system? Will it be another situation that we saw in LA and that we saw in Columbus and Winnipeg? And then the goaltending, Charlie Lindgren, is he a full-time starting goalie? He was good when he was the starter last year. He faltered in the playoffs because he was playing the Rangers. How is he going to look this upcoming season as the guy from day one? That's going to be an interesting caveat for Washington. But I'm excited about what the roster looks like now. I'm excited that, Brian McClellan is actually taking a vested interest in improving this roster when he has the space to do so. So I like what I'm seeing. Obviously, Pacioretty, I don't think he has a spot in Washington anymore. He's had a good career. The injuries have slowed him down. He's not a goal scorer anymore. He's not a playmaker anymore. And Obey Kubel, if they can find a way to keep him on that 4th line, that'd be nice. He's the prototypical Caps 4th line guy. That would be cool. But other than that, I mean, these names, there's not much here because the Caps have done a lot to get guys and secure them for this season.
Rick Parashek out of Prince George in the WHL, the 17th overall draft pick, and will join the prospect pool, likely headed to Hershey fairly soon. Pittsburgh just missed out on the playoffs, 5th in the Metro, 88 points overall, and in a similar spot. Not too much cap to work with, just $12.9 million projected available cap as they hit July 1st coming up. 14 out of their 23 roster spots signed. They've added Alex Nedeljkovic on a 2-year, $2.5 million deal. And a correction, from the last time we talked about him, it was not a 2 times 5. It's a 2 times 2.5, $5 million total over the 2 years, which is a much better deal than what we had initially talked about there. Also, Jansen Harkins, who's a 2-way, mostly AHL guy, is a UFA, and Joseph Pierre Olivier, a forward, is an RFA. But next year is the big one for them. UFA is coming up in 2025. Sidney Crosby, Riley Smith, Lars Eller, O'Connor, Puljujärvi, who was a late signing, didn't play too much of an impact on their lineup. He's also on a minimum deal, so that's not a huge one. And Pettersson for next year, and the captain being the big one there, and Sidney Crosby. Whether or not he's going to choose to stay, they're probably going to have to make a run, make something interested to keep him there for at least the remainder of his career, if not his UFA year next year.
Yeah, the Penguins are really quiet so far in this free agency. Kyle Dubas, after going all in last season, he described the approach as the exact opposite of that. He said, we're pivoting away from that. Now, that doesn't necessarily scream rebuild to me, but it definitely sounds like a bit of a quieting down after Dubas kind of went all in, put the chips in, and things blew up in his face with the Penguins missing the playoffs last season. So it is intriguing to me what their plan is. Obviously, no first round picks for them. So they had a bunch of picks in the second, third round, so they got some guys to shore things up. But overall, the team's in some trouble, and they may be facing down the barrel of another unsuccessful season. You mentioned the names that are on the board here on the free agent side of things. Sidney Crosby is the big name of those. for Pittsburgh. So, they're going to do their darnest to get him back and to lock him up for the majority or the entirety of his NHL career. But I think Kyle Dubas is very interesting to me, that he's just kind of punting on the free agents so far. It's been really quiet for the Penguins, which is not what I expected from them.
Philadelphia Flyers, 87 points, sixth in the Metro, and another group with a short list of impending free agents and just about no cap to work with whatsoever. They've bought out Cam Atkinson to start the offseason here. $503.5 thousand is all that they're expected to have going into July 1st. 19 of their 23 roster spots are filled right now. Their UFAs, Dennis Gurianov, Eric Johnson, and Mark Stahl, who's likely on the verge of retirement. Just one RFA in Zamala Yegor. Next year, it would have been Atkinson, Konechny, Johansson, and Hathaway are all impending free agents. In the draft, they add Jet Luchenko from Guelph in the OHL, 13th overall, and possibly the greatest draft announcement of all time, as Michael Buffer has Philadelphia ready to rumble.
Yeah, that was a cool moment in the draft. Also, Jet Luchenko, what a hockey name right there. I think that's a good pick for the Flyers. You check out some of his highlights, he can move for sure. And the Flyers, look, I mean, there's not too much excitement here either. Maybe it's the Pennsylvania effect. Who knows? The cap, you mentioned it, is as slim as possible. Not too many names here to talk about. The Atkinson thing, obviously unfortunate for him in his time with Philadelphia after that Voracek trade. So, I don't expect much from the Flyers upcoming this season. We didn't see much from them this past season. So maybe Tortorella, wrings something out of this roster like he tried to do last season and got 87 points out of them. But at the end of the day, this team doesn't look that strong again. Maybe they try and swing a big splash and get rid of one of their bad contracts or their heavy contracts, but I don't really see that happening for this Flyers team. And I think it's going to be another situation where maybe it's next year they get some guys in development. Jamie Drysdale comes back healthy, and then they compete the year after.
Team that I think as well headed for regression in the upcoming year went balls to the wall out of the gate and just could not quite get to the playoffs this year. Tortorella, I think, will be coming to an end in Philly as well. I think they're going to have a tough year ahead, and a guy who's built for tension. A tough year, I would say, coming for Philadelphia. We'll have to wait and see. Maybe they surprise us all, but they're definitely up against it with the cap. The New Jersey Devils clearing out some space. Going into the draft day, they had $18.8 million expected, and since then have gotten rid of some more cap, so probably somewhere upwards of $20 million available. Also, a new coach coming in, Lindy Ruff fired. He's out. Sheldon Keefe coming in as the new head coach after getting dropped by the Toronto Maple Leafs, so it'll be interesting to see what he can do. And unfortunately for Keefe, you go out and you have a couple of great regular seasons. You make it through the playoffs for the first time, and who knows how long for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And this year they couldn't get it done to the Boston Bruins in 7 games, and it was either him or some of the core 4. And unfortunately, he draws the short straw. But good for him is that he gets a job right away. He's headed to New Jersey, and I think this is a team that's going to blow it out of the water this coming year, Colin. Here coming up this year, just 5 UFAs. They've already signed one of them in Curtis McDermott. Thomas Nosek, Chris Tierney, Nick DeSimone, Brennan Smith are the remaining UFAs there, and none of those are playing anywhere near their top 6. The RFAs, Nolan Foote and Dawson Mercer, and Mercer's really the only huge name there. They deal out Ball and get Markstrom now to play goalie, which I think is really the only reason that Lindy Ruff lost his job. For the New Jersey Devils, it's tough to be upset with the upcoming offseason, especially with the amount of cap that they're going to make a big boom with some signings coming up in a few days.
Yeah, you talk about the core is still there. The Hughes brothers are still there. This team's going to be good. And you mentioned the cap space. $18.8 million is a lot for, you can get 3-4 really solid players with that, 5 really solid players if they want to go big, or they can, piecemeal it together. But this roster is looking a lot better. Sheldon Keefe, I think, is a good fit for the Devils after what happened in Toronto. You have to imagine it's just kind of a reset button for Keefe and for kind of what he endured in Toronto. There are a lot of things that he kind of did wrong in Toronto, obviously, with his relations with the media, but also the way he coached some of these games for the Maple Leafs in the playoffs, especially. So kind of a hard reset for him and a hard reset for the New Jersey Devils, but their core is the same. They're going to be a powerhouse this coming season. I agree with you on that.
One thing I didn't realize initially as well until I did some more research today, the Jacob Markstrom trade not only picks up a top 5, I would say, goaltender in Markstrom. Calgary's retaining 32% of Markstrom's salary. So that's an impeccable deal for the Devils. They draft Anton Silyev, who will be coming from the KHL, the 10th overall pick, and another guy who adds to a prospect pool of an already deep, young team that has made NHL experience priority here over the last couple of years. Made the playoffs 2 years ago, missed it last year, but got the number 10 overall pick, and a lot of that with some unfortunate injuries. Dougie Hamilton's going to be back. They might be adding a couple more Carolina Hurricanes to go alongside him on the blue line. And I think the Devils will be making a run at the Metro Championship. Down to the bottom of the Metro and the Columbus Blue Jackets, who had 66 points, 8th overall in the Metro. A lot of cap space again, but it's tough to see them doing too much in the next couple of years to turn it over until some of their draft picks really start to gain some experience. Don Waddell in as the general manager after Jarmo Kekalainen, a Clarkson connection, unfortunately relieved in February. Pascal Vincent also relieved of his duty as head coach. So haven't announced a new one yet, but eventually Columbus will be in the business for a head coach. Just 2 UFAs for them in Brandon Gaunce and Carson Meyer. A long list of RFAs. Igor Chinnikov already signed on a 2 times $2.1 million deal. 2 times $2.1 million a year deal. That's a tongue twister. Say that one 20 times fast. But also have to figure out Kirill Marchenko, Alexander Nylander, Cole Sillinger, Alexander Texier, and Jake Bean coming up here. And in the draft, making a big push in the 4 spot, passing over a good Russian option. They picked Caden Lindstrom from the WHL with the 4th overall draft pick.
Yeah, interesting pick there. I think he's going to, at the very least, be something when he does make it to Columbus. It could be a year, could be a couple out of the WHL for the Blue Jackets. But I think you said it. There's a lot of cap space here. Don't anticipate them making too big of a splash free agency-wise. Remember the Johnny Gaudreau, all of that. I don't think we're seeing that again this season. I think the big splash for them was this draft, was this 4th overall pick and what they were able to do kind of sequentially. But I mean, look, the Blue Jackets aren't going to be too competitive this season again. They're just not. And the team's not really built for that right now. It's going to take another couple of years. You mentioned, Sillinger and Texier, 2 guys that have been productive, maybe relatively speaking, but they have been productive. So you would hope that they can retain those guys. But other than that, this roster doesn't look too strong. The 66 points last year, maybe they're staring at a 70-point season, a 5-point marginal jump if things go right for them. Other than that, I don't really expect much from the Blue Jackets.
The Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers are on top of the Atlantic as we move divisions now. 110 points this past year, Atlantic Division champs, and more importantly, Stanley Cup champions. But I think this could be the end of the road for the Cats. 14 out of their 23 roster spots are filled. That means 9 of them are still remaining, and $19.7 million of cap space to fill a large number of roster spots. Nick Cousins, Ryan Lomberg, Steven Lorentz, Kyle Okposo from the bottom lines. Sam Reinhart, their top scorer. It sounds like they are closing in on a deal on him. Kevin Stenlund, Vladimir Tarasenko are up. Those are all your forwards. Then onto the D-core, Oliver Ekman-Larsson, Dmitry Kulikov, Brandon Montour, all expiring. Anthony Stolars, the backup goaltender, is a UFA as well. RFAs Anton Lundell and Josh Mahura. Next year, they'll have to deal with Sam Bennett, Carter Verhaeghe, and Ekblad. So the good news is they have the Stanley Cup for the summer. The unfortunate news, the team might be looking quite a bit different next year, and it'll be interesting to see if they can continue to contend at the same rate.
Yeah, 14 of the 27 that were on their active playoff roster are locked down for this coming season. That means 13, like we just talked about, those guys you mentioned are, this kind of in the ether type position. Obviously, they're going to do what they can to get Sam Reinhart back. You have to imagine that's their priority of those UFAs you mentioned. I think Anton Lundell should be another priority in the RFA slot because he's a young guy. He's shown what he can do both in the playoffs and in the regular season. But suffice to say, the team's going to be a lot different this coming year, and it's easy to kind of be like, oh well, we got the Stanley Cup last year, or this past year. So it's kind of okay that things are going to look different, but that the Florida GM and the coaching staff, everyone's going to want the kind of core to remain the same. Obviously, Matthew Tkachuk and Barkov and Verhaeghe's around for one more year. Sam Bennett's around for one more year at the very least. Ekblad, the same thing. So there is that aspect of it all, but I think the Panthers are going to look a lot different. Reinhart, I have to imagine, is going to stick around. Tarasenko, I don't think so, and I think Lindell will get a contract as well.
Team you're very close with, the Boston Bruins, being from Boston, second in the Atlantic, 109 points. They have $20.9 million of cap space coming up, but 9 UFAs and 1 RFA to deal with. Jesper Boquist, the RFA. They also have DeBrusk, Heinen, Pat Maroon, Megna, Van Riemsdyk, Forbort, Reslick, Shattenkirk, and Jeremy Swayman, all UFAs. A big trade. Allmark is no longer there, and no hugs to be had in Boston anymore, as Eunice Korpisalo comes in with 25% of his contract retained by Ottawa, and Mark Kostelic. Next year, they have to prepare for the captain, Brad Marchand, Trent Frederick, Brown, Brazeau, Wotherspoon, and RFAs in Geeky, Beecher, Locko, and Lorai. So a good amount of expiring contracts here, but still the main core of your top 6 are there. It sounds like DeBrusk is going to be on the way out to find a lot more money, but the opportunity to bring some top name guys in, and they've been in connection with a couple of big UFAs, according to some of the insiders in Elliot Friedman and Kevin Weeks.
Yeah, I think the Bruins, we said this last season and it didn't really come to pass. I think this year with the Allmark deal freeing some things up is going to happen. The Bruins need a top 6 center. It was Pavel Zacha last year and it worked to a point, but then you were looking for superstar power in the playoffs and Zacha just wasn't providing that. If it's Elias Lindholm, if it's Chandler Stevenson, who's been a fantastic playoff performer throughout his NHL career, I think either of those names would be suitable playing right next to David Pastrnak. I think that's what the Bruins need. The goaltending side, this is the test for Jeremy Swayman, and we talked about how amazing he was in the playoffs and the Bruins still couldn't get it done. Now he's going to have to show that he is the guy for an entire regular season, and that's a really, really big piece of the puzzle for Boston. That's one of the primary narratives that's going to be talked about as this season starts in October. And the draft, Dean Letourneau is coming to Boston. He's going to be in BC this upcoming season. Another Boston College product is a Boston Bruins prospect, so I'll get a good look at him this upcoming season in Hockey East play, standing up at 6'7", just a little bit taller than I am. But yeah, so this Bruins team, DeBrusk, I think is it's inevitable that he's gone. He's going to get some money elsewhere, like you said, and that's going to exacerbate the Bruins scoring woes. They can't find a top 6 center, and Van Riemsdyk is probably, I don't see them staying on with him. Swayman's going to get a contract, you have to imagine. Dan Heinen and Pat Maroon. I mean, the team's going to look a lot different, but they have that $20.9 million. They're going to retain a couple of these guys, but I think they need to go out and get some names because it was the Allmark contract kind of holding them back and the DeBrusk contract kind of holding them back when it came to signing new guys either in trade deadlines or in free agency. And now those handcuffs aren't there anymore. So this team is going to make some big splashes here going forward.
I want to give a shout out as well to Clarkson prospect Jonathan Morello, who was drafted in the 5th round by the Bruins. Next, we go to the Toronto Maple Leafs, who were knocked out by the Bruins, and another Clarkson guy, Matt Leahy, picked in the 7th round. Those were our two prospects there. Northeastern, I'm sure, has a pretty good list going as well of guys that are had their names called here over the past couple of days. Toronto, 102 points, third in the Atlantic, knocked out in Game 7. Sheldon Keefe gone. Craig Berube coming in to coach the Leafs. $18.5 million of cap space to deal with the expiring contracts of Tyler Bertuzzi, Max Domi, TJ Brody, Joel Edmondson, Mark Giordano, and Ilya Lyubushkin. Their RFAs are Connor Dewar, Noah Gregor, Nick Robertson, and Tim Liljegren. Next year, Tavares, Marner, and McCabe are impending UFAs. I've heard a lot of rumors that Marner might be on the move. That has not happened through the draft. Still has the offseason as his contract goes the whole year. And it's been up and down on sometimes it sounds like Marner's staying, sometimes Marner's going. Sounds like Max Domi's going to be staying for at least 3 years, a good contract and a good payout. I heard 3 times 5 coming for Domi, which is exciting. Guy who was born around the Maple Leafs organization. Also sounded like Bertuzzi wanted to stay there. So a good chunk of the forward core coming back, potentially the core 4. I think personally they should deal Marner and try to get a big return, though.
Yeah, that's what I kind of been seeing around social media is that the general Leafs fan base at large is kind of over Mitch Marner. They want to get a big return, free up some of that cap space, and make another big splash. You mentioned 18.5 million. That's a lot for this Leafs team with a couple of guys still locked up. John Tavares, you mentioned next year will be the UFA. Austin Matthews, there's no worries with him. And Max Domi getting that contract, I think, he deserved it from what we saw from him in the playoffs, right? That was some great performances from him. This Leafs team, the core is probably going to stick at the very least close to what it was last year. But when you go down the list, you see Mark Giordano potentially leaving and TJ Brody. Tyler Bertuzzi, I think, is going to be on his way out as well. There are guys that are going to change the complexion of this team, but I do see the Leafs going out and making some big moves in the next few days upcoming to the start of the regular season.
They just traded for the rights to Chris Tanev as well. So now 2 days as this trade has gone down to sign Tanev potentially to that blue line, and that would just about seal the fate of Giordano being on his way out there. The Tampa Bay Lightning clearing out a lot of space, as we talked about on the top of the show. 98 points for them, 4th in the Atlantic in the first wild card spot. Sergachev and Tanner Jeannot are no longer Lightning. And again, a team with a good list of UFAs, but not a lot of cap to work with. Before all the trades, they had just $5 million to deal with. Now they get rid of Jeannot and Sergachev's contract, so probably up near $10 million after those are gone. Stamkos, Duclair, Tyler Mott, Austin Watson, Cal DeHaan, Matt Dumba, Hayden Fleury are all UFAs. So at least 4 spots on the offense and 3 defenders that they got to figure out some contracts to bring in.
Yeah, big names here, obviously Stamkos and Duclair. For Stamkos, the reporting is that he will test free agency and that it's a foregone conclusion at this point. We talked about that contract that was offered to him. The $5 million in cap space gives you a little bit of a pause for this Lightning team that they're probably going to drop a little bit if Stamkos does leave, if he does get a big payday somewhere else, or at least a bigger payday than what was offered by the Lightning. The team's going to look a lot different. There's still a lot of good names on this team. Of course, Nikita Kucherov is one of them, and not too many big names are going to be on the hook next season. You mentioned Jeannot. We talked about Luke Glendening, and Victor Hedman obviously is the big one. But overall, I think the Lightning are still going to be fine after a 98-point year. But Stamkos is that'd be a breaker if he does end up leaving.
They also acquired Ryan McDonough back from Nashville in a trade earlier in the offseason. Detroit came 5th in the Atlantic, 91 total points. They have a huge list of cap space available, $29.1 million for the Red Wings. Patrick Kane is likely on his way out. Christian Fischer, David Perron, Daniel Sprong, Shane Gostisbehere, and James Reimer, all UFAs. Lucas Raymond, Joe Velino, and Mo Seider are RFAs. They drafted Michael Brandberg Nygaard from Sweden, 15th overall. And in extremely disappointing fashion, Yzerman did not take Yzerman with that deal. But a lot of opportunity here for the Red Wings, who were scratching at the surface of the playoffs this year. They now open up quite a bit of opportunity with the cap availability, just around 30 million. I think they got to bring back Perron, a guy who's a big leader in the room there. I think maybe Sprong comes back. I like Gostisbehere as a power play quarterback, but I could see him opting to go somewhere else, especially with the offseason coming up. Defense are going to be worth a lot of money wherever they can get contracts. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him walk, but with that opens up more cap space for the Red Wings to work with.
Yeah, and we just talked about Stamkos. He could be a fit here in Detroit, Casey, with the way that this team is constructed. You mentioned the top 6 upgrade he would be, and that's what Detroit wants after the season that they had this past year. And the cap space is conducive to that, right? 29.1 million. They still got to sign a lot of players. You expect, do you expect Patrick Kane to come back? I think so. I think they do retain him. Daniel Sprong and David Perron, I think they probably end up letting go. Lucas Raymond, I think they find a way to keep. And Mo Seider, obviously, I think they find a way to keep. So this Detroit team's going to be good. I mean, 91 points, and you potentially add in a Steven Stamkos to this roster. They're going to be solid this upcoming season. They got a good goaltender back there as well. So, and I think Michael Branson-Nygaard was a really, really great pick at 15th overall too. Obviously Cole Yzerman was still there, to your point, Casey, but I think this team is looking good. They're looking strong in terms of now and also the future.
The Buffalo fan base continues to take shots below the belt, and this felt like the year after 2 years in a row where they were right in the playoff hunt. They weren't anywhere near it at 84 points at the end of the season, 6th in the Atlantic. They have $23.2 million as of Thursday before the draft. It's up now as they've just decided to buy out Jeff Skinner's contract, which will buy them about $5 million extra. Trade with your Capitals that you're happy with on the Capitals side. You mentioned earlier in the show you think that Buffalo got fleeced there. New coaching staff coming in here for Buffalo. Granato out, Lindy Ruff in as the head coach. Gergensons, Yost, Olofsson, Robinson, Comrie are all UFAs. Krebs, Bryson, Clegg, Yugiharu, and Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, my favorite name in hockey, are RFAs for the Buffalo Sabres. And with Skinner on the move here now, if he clears unconditional waivers, that you got to think is going to be reason to bring in some sort of powerhouse to go along with Tage Thompson and Alex Tuch. Thompson, who fought injury all year, just could not get it going. Tuch had a brutal year as well. Unfortunately, Skinner takes the brunt of a bad year all around for the Buffalo Sabres offense. I'd love to see him re-suit up potentially in a Carolina Hurricanes uniform where he was drafted to. I think he'd be a great fit there if he makes it to unrestricted free agency. But Buffalo needs to get something going. A young group. I think the D-core maturing in Dahlin and especially Owen Power, who got signed to the big contract, didn't have a year to live up to that, but now maybe an offseason to motivate him here. If he can get going a little bit offensively, limit some turnovers, Buffalo could be right there. But if it'll be interesting to see Lindy Ruff. I didn't think that was my favorite hire of the available coaches in the league. But Lindy Ruff, a guy who's very hard on players, and for this young group, that might be just what they need.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that. I do think they probably should try and go sign a vet, and maybe you're gonna have to overpay for a player such as that can offer leadership. But when you've been kind of stagnant for so many years, you need to do something to get yourself out of it. And I think trading for Beck Mallenstein obviously is not the splash that Sabres fans wanted. He's a good fourth line grinder. He plays his role well, but he's not a superstar, right? He's not a guy that can be on a line with Tage Thompson and actually match production. And obviously Thompson's one of the best goal scorers in the league when he's Tage Thompson, when he's healthy. But I think this team needs something, and $23.2 million, they can do it in terms of the cap. They just need to go out and do it. And for Buffalo, where their only kind of crowning achievement was we had a player that won the Stanley Cup. He's not with us anymore, but he won the Stanley Cup. Jack Eichel and Sam Reinhart, and there's probably three more players that I can't even think of off the top of my head right now.
The captain in Okposo.
Yeah, there you go.
And then about to retire.
Yeah, Jeff Skinner probably wherever he goes, start betting on them to win the Stanley Cup. Like that's just the brutal luck for the Buffalo Sabres pointing over at Carolina, Casey. That'd be nice. But yeah, so not much to say here about the Sabres until they actually do something, right? I mean, you would hope that they do something. It would be great to see this roster and this young team compete and make the playoffs and see Tage Thompson on that stage. But at this point, and Owen Power and Dahlin as well. But at this point, it's not looking like it's in the cards with this roster. They need to make some moves.
They went with Eric Johnson trying to bring in the vet, as you mentioned, and that was a complete failure on the defensive end. Johnson, a great locker room guy, but just a little too old for the style of the Buffalo Sabres, and certainly they'll move on from him here. Ottawa, another team that's just been unable with a lot of talent in the roster to get over that hump to make it to the playoffs. A 78-point season, 7th in the Atlantic. They have $12.2 million of cap space, and it sounds like plans to make a few trades here in the offseason. DJ Smith was fired. Travis Green will now take over as the head coach. Just one UFA in Dominic Kubalik. The RFAs are Kachuk, Kelly, Pinto, and Brandstrom. Next year, they'll have to deal with Giroux, Chychrun, Hamonic, and Forsberg. Chychrun, one of those talked about trade targets, maybe Tomas Chabot as well. But for Brady Tkachuk, seeing his brother lift the Stanley Cup, you got to think he's going to be a guy who's worth taking a top fantasy pick on. But for the Ottawa Senators as a team as a whole, a lot to do. Linus Ullmark comes in from Boston, but I think it's going to be similar to Joonas Korpisalo if they can't figure out the blue line. Korpisalo was a great goaltender out in LA. They bring him into Ottawa and just couldn't get any defense in front of him, and he got lit up every time he stepped into the crease. Now he goes to Boston, which I think is going to be a great fit, a solid defensive team. Ottawa, it's a great pickup, but what else can they do here in the offseason with that 12 million and maybe some trades to try to lock it up in front of Ullmark to put them in a spot for that offense to be able to thrive?
Yeah, and so much of the reporting around the team is that Chychrun might be on the move, right, via trade. And when I saw the Caps in their deals with the Flames, I was like, oh, the Flames can package the picks and go get Chychrun from Ottawa. Like, there wasn't really the mentality of Ottawa holding on to their guys and competing. It's still the fire sale that we've been talking about for the Senators. It's always tough for Ottawa to sign elite free agents. Jake Gensel himself said he wanted to stay in the United States and not go up to a Canadian team. That's part of the equation here for the Senators. They're one of the smaller market Canadian teams. So I don't know. There's not much else to say about the Sens except that Brady Tkachuk's going to be a man on a mission, and he's probably going to get somewhat disillusioned with the process as the season goes on with the Senators, because I don't see this team being very successful this season.
Montreal, last place in the East, 76 points, 8th in the Atlantic, and $9.1 million to deal with. But arguably the best pick in the draft, maybe against the New York Islanders back at 20, but Ivan Demidov, who went 5th overall and dropped all the way down to Montreal, was slated to go number 2, and a lot of the analysts had him a pretty heavy 2. He goes all the way down to 5th. They also add Michael Haig in the first round at the 21st overall spot. Demidov's going to go right in there with Cole Caulfield. They've got, again, another team with a young group. Not too many free agents coming up here. Shikai is a RFA, and Lonan, Pearson, and White are UFAs. Neither of them were huge factors in their top 6. So this could be a year that maybe Montreal takes a step here. I'm interested to see if Demidov goes straight to the NHL. They've said he's NHL ready. He'll at least be in the AHL this year. But I would not be surprised if Montreal, out of the last 4 teams we've talked about, is the one that is the first to get into the playoffs.
Yeah, I would agree. I think with the Demidov pick, it's crazy that he fell this far. I mean, I was thinking Chicago was going to take him the entire time, and if not, then Anaheim. If not, then Columbus. Right? Like I thought Demidov was the most NHL ready prospect, not named Macklin Celebrini in this draft, and that was kind of the consensus around him in the media. And then what do we see for the team? So in the Canadians, even though they have 9.1 million, there's still ways they can go and sign someone. Can they get Sam Reinhart? Probably not. Can they get a guy like Anthony Duclair, who we talked about? Maybe that could be one of the fits for Montreal. Duclair would be coming over from Tampa Bay, like we said when we talked about the Lightning. So this team, there's the bones here, and there's a guy like Kirby Dach, if he stays healthy with Montreal, he could be a good point producer. And if you pair him right away with a guy like Duclair, or if it happens, Sam Reinhart, this offense could actually produce. So that we've talked about the goaltending situation with them as well. And the defense, Lane Hutson's going to be a big piece of the puzzle for them. We saw what he could do coming into the NHL as a green face, kid, and actually producing somewhat for Montreal. And they got a young decor there. So this team's going to be interesting. It might not be this year, it could be next year, but there is a pathway here. You don't really see that pathway with the team like the Senators, that we've talked about, or even a team like the Blue Jackets, that there is a pathway here for the Canadians to be successful going forward.
We're halfway there, 16 teams down, 16 to go, and we move from the East to the West now. Dallas, the team on top of the West after the regular season, the runner-up in the playoffs to the Edmonton Oilers. 113 points put them as the number one seed going into the playoffs. They have $15.9 million of cap space available with 7 UFAs. Matt Duchene, Joe Pavelski, Craig Smith, Yanni Hakanpää, Derek Pouliot, Chris Tanev, and Scott Wedgwood. Tanev on the move already. He's not going to be coming back to Dallas. His rights sent over to Toronto. I think that offers a lot of space for Yanni Hakanpää to come back, who has played a big piece in their blue line over the past 3-4 years. I really like Matt Duchene, the way he fit into that offense. I'm extremely interested to see if they find a way to re-sign him, even if it goes after July 1st. But Matt Duchene struggled in Nashville. He was a top prospect, a top pick that didn't quite pan out there. They send him over to Dallas, and all of a sudden he blew up this year. He was a huge piece of their success and a big piece of their top six. Joe Pavelski is retiring, so they won't have to worry about filling that contract. On the RFA side, Ty Dellandrea, they sent him to San Jose. His rights, Sam Steele, Thomas Harley, Nils Lundqvist, and Matt Murray are the RFAs there. I think they'll try to get Harley done for sure. A nice young talent that fit right in on the power play as well. Next year, a big one with Ben Marchment and Dadonov all up. They bought out Ryan Suter's contract, so they'll only have to pay right around $1 million on the cap hit for him, and they get rid of his deal that would be expiring next year anyways. So Colin, a little bit of work to be done here, but a good amount of cap and the majority of their core still sticking around for next year. I think Dallas isn't going anywhere.
Yeah, the team's going to be legit going forward, absolutely. And you mentioned the core. Wyatt Johnston is going to take another big step forward this season. They don't have to worry about him contract-wise for a couple of years. Robertson, the same kind of thing. This team is going to still be really good. And the hallmark of them this past year, which is something we talked about when they got eliminated, was the depth, right? That they had this depth. They were the deepest team in the playoff field. I think that goes without saying. And they still weren't able to get the job done. Then Joe Pavelski retires, and that's kind of a somber moment for the team. But overall, the depth is still going to be there. If it's not these guys, if it's not, Hakanpää and Pouliot on defense, they're going to go out and re-sign other guys that can fill in this system, which was a really successful system. $15.9 million in cap isn't nothing. Like they have some space to get some guys. I don't necessarily expect a splash. I think Duchene, if they do re-sign him, is probably the splashiest we'll get for this Stars offseason, but they don't really need one because they got the guys that they need here. It's just the question of, can they get over the top here and make it to the Cup final this coming season?
One thing I'm really interested to see and to keep an eye on, I think they'll go out. I could see them spending a lot of money on some older guys, maybe some veteran presence that still have a lot left in the tank, but maybe a shorter deal, because you look at the young core they have, the Stankovens, the AHL guys that are going to be making the transition in here. Maverick Bork, one of those guys that lit up the AHL this year, got a couple games with Dallas, but not a full-time player. Those guys all have 2-3 more years on their entry deals before they're going to be worth a lot of money. So maybe you go out and you sign a couple of big name veterans or a couple of guys that are trying to go on huge prove it deals, sign them to 1-2 year contracts. And that could be a major way for Dallas to get over the hump and get that Stanley Cup down to get the biggest trophy to where everything is bigger. Winnipeg, a team you're very high on, or you were very high on at least, 110 points this season, second in the Central. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts on whether or not they can continue that here. This year, the UFA's Monahan, Toffoli, Dylan DeMello, Brendan Dillon, who they've now signed on a 4 times $4.9 million contract, Colin Miller, Laurent Brossoit, and Colin Delia. Their RFAs, Gustafson, Perfetti, and Stanley. Interesting and also to see whether or not Perfetti will be suiting up as a Jet next year. But Rick Bowness retires, so Scott Arniel now taking the helm here. And a disappointing playoff after a great regular season. But I think a lot of alarms going off in Winnipeg that, that they felt like they were there for a lot of the year, but they're not anywhere close to being a Stanley Cup contender. And Colin, for this team, what do you see happening here in the offseason? What needs to happen for them to become a legit contender, not only in the regular season?
Yeah, they need some stability. First things first. I mean, the future of Nikolai Ehlers still up in the air for them, and he's been a big part of this team for a long time. Their top prospect, Rutger McGroarty, sorry if I mispronounced that, he reportedly doesn't see a future in Winnipeg. Like, the stability aspect, it was good that they got Dylan DeMello for 4 years, but they need a second, left-handed defender to replace Brendan Dillon if he does end up leaving, which, we kind of anticipate that to happen. And, another top blue liner. So, guy like Neil Pionk can maybe play a little bit farther down because he struggled in the end part of this past season. And I think, offensively, they have a lot of top scorers. Kyle Connor is one of the best goal scorers in the NHL. Maybe another center to replace Sean Monahan. But other than that, like, there's a lot here that this team needs. Even though they were so successful last year, there's not a lot of stability. And Connor Hellebuyck is going to be great again, obviously. But there's not much outside of that in terms of stability for this Winnipeg Jets team. And you're not going to be a Stanley Cup contender if you're not stable. And that's the big problem with them right now.
Another team with a disappointing finish, the Colorado Avalanche, 107 points, third in the Central. They dominated the Winnipeg Jets in the playoffs, and then it halted on the brakes there. Val Nichushkin in the player assistance program, his future is up in the air. The problem for Colorado is they can't do anything with his contract until he clears the program. And if he gets cleared to play, his contract is still owned by Colorado. So unless they can find a suitor that really wants Nichushkin, he's a $6.125 million contract that you can't just give away that cap. Gabe Landeskog also allegedly trying to get back into the lineup. He's on a 7 times $7 million deal. Those two guys alone, who potentially could be back, potentially aren't coming back at all, are right there eating up $13.5 million of your cap space. And on top of that, you have $15 million to work with between Cogliano, Drouin, Duhaime, Kivi Ranta, Trennan, Jack Johnston, Caleb Jones, Sean Walker. But that 15.9 is not included with the 13 million that Landeskog and Nichushkin might be eating. So it's a tough situation that they're in. They've already signed Casey Middlestad on a $3.575 million deal, but with Mikko Rantanen expiring next year, Georgiev and Logan O'Connor as well. Colin, what are you doing if you're the Colorado Avalanche?
Yeah, they're going to have to try and find their way and get some, higher value contracts that don't really bust this cap space too much. And it's tough to do, right, for a Colorado team that obviously has been so successful over the past couple of years. When it comes down to the guys that are on this UFA list, there's big names, like you said. Kivaranta is one of them that I kind of key in on, but next year is when things are really going to start getting tough. And the biggest problems are the Nichushkin contracts and the Landeskog contracts. If those guys don't come back, there's a lot of unused cap space for Colorado, and that they can't let that happen. So they're going to have to find a way to get around everything that is happening with Nichushkin and Landeskog. I think they're still going to be fine. Obviously, the Nathan McKinnon and Cale Makar effect can offset some of those things. But overall, this team is looking a little bit shaky. And like we said about Winnipeg, there's a little bit of a threat of instability with the Landeskog and the Nichushkin contracts. You got to think they're going to do what they can to keep Mikko Rantanen around for a long time. Alexander Georgiev, potentially, I could see them trying to move off of him too. So there's some intrigue here with this Avalanche team.
I wonder if there's any chance that we see 78 hanging behind me here back in that roster. A guy I would be willing to bet would be a trade target, at least at the deadline, a lockdown center on a low deal contract at about $3 million AAV. The Nashville Predators, a team with a lot of room to work with, $26 million of cap room. Beauvillier, Sherwood, Jason Zucker, Jeremy Lauzon, Alexander Carrier, and Kevin Lankinen are on expiring deals. But again, Colin, a lot of room to work with and not many huge names that you have to deal with re-signing here.
No, not too many huge names. They could be in the mix for Steven Stamkos. The money does kind of check out on that end, like you were just talking about in terms of their cap space with 26 million available, and they're going to be good next year still. I mean, they were one of the big surprises of this past NHL season, pushing 100 points with the 99 mark. UC Saros is still there for one more season until they got to deal with him. Nyquist and Robbie Fowler the same thing. Gustav Nyquist, I should say. So I think they're going to be good. If they do try and make a big splash in terms of Stamkos, I'd like to see that. That would be pretty cool on the Predators end of things, and they have the space to get it done. Of these guys on this list, Beauvillier is probably the biggest name, and maybe Jeremy Lauzon as well, in terms of how much money it would take to keep them there. Will they do it? I think Beauvillier probably. That's just kind of my gut feeling about that with the money that they have available, and they want to keep what has worked in the past still available. So yeah, I think there's not much else to say about the Predators except that they're in a good spot for this coming season.
Sounds like UC Saros is on the fritz of a deal around $8 million. He's a 2025 UFA coming up, and after a lot of trade talk around him, it sounds like he'll be a Predator for the long term, which I think I strongly agree with. After the previous name to his predecessor, that's going to be hanging in the rafters for quite a while. Maybe you'll have back-to-back goalies from the Nashville Predators. They draft the Russian Yegor Shurin with the 22 overall pick that is probably 2 years away from being an NHLer. St. Louis finished with 92 points this season, fifth in the Central, $15.6 million, and 17 of their 23 roster spaces filled. Craig Berube out, Drew Bannister hired as the head coach here. Just 3 UFAs that they have to work with: Samuel Blaise, Kasperi Kapanen, and Marco Scandella. They signed RFA Scott Prunovich to a one-times $1.15 million prove-it deal. Nikita Alexandrov is also a RFA this year. Next year, they also only have one UFA, and it's Buchnevich. So this could be a team that makes a big splash with their roster locked up for seemingly at least the next 3 years here, and $15.6 million of cap space to work with.
Yeah, they got the space to do so. The Alexander Texier trade is good for St. Louis. He kind of got squeezed out of the lineup over in Columbus. So now he should be able to profile as a solid point producer and goal scorer for them this upcoming season. I think that the Blues are in a good spot, right? 92 points with a roster that's for the most part coming back. Pavel Buchnevich was good this past year and has been in the past couple of years for the Blues. And you look at 2025, there's only 5 names on that list. So that's pretty good. And they could be facing some green pastures for the next couple of years.
Pretty scary to think that they were knocking on the door for a lot of the season, and they all they have to do is go up from here. It's tough to see them regressing with that thought in mind. And as you mentioned, Texier signed to a 2 times $2.1 million extension after trading for his rights. They also got Adam Juracek, the Czechia member, with the 16th overall pick. Minnesota, a team that is on cap lockdown and a cap penalty that they've been eating for quite a while here, and I believe 2 more years while they'll be in cap trouble here. 87 points this year, 6th in the Central, just $5.9 million available as they deal with 3 UFAs, Jacob Lucchini, Alex Gligoski, Dakota Mermis, and their RFAs are Mason Shaw and Declan Trizome. Next year, they'll have Johansson, Letary, Middleton, who I think they'll have stick around, a big locker room guy there, Merrill, and Marc-Andre Fleury, who might be on the verge of retirement by then. An exciting name they add is Zeev Buyum, who I think will fit right in on the blue line with Calder nominee Brock Faber there coming out of Denver in the NCAA. I could see him going this year after being the 12th overall selection.
Yeah, this was one of the other steals of the first round, Casey. Buyum falling to 12 overall. Not necessarily what I expected from, really dynamic puck moving defender that can quarterback a power play, a Lane Hudson type, but bigger than Lane Hudson. That's more NHL ready right off the bat than Lane Hudson. So I think Buyum is going to be a really good producer for them. And obviously coming over from Denver in one of the better NCAA programs out there that just won a national championship. So I think that was one of the better picks. Cole Eiserman, the steal, in my opinion, of the first round, but Buyum a close second in terms of falling down to 12. And this Minnesota Wild team is young. They're really hungry, obviously, from after what happened last year. They got Kaprizov and Faber. So this team is looking really, really strong. And you mentioned the cap lockdown part of it. That obviously gives you a little bit of a pause, but the roster is still pretty solid.
The Utah Hockey Club is existent and thriving, one of the active teams in the trade market at the draft. And not only that, but the number 1 cap availability of any team. They have $43.2 million to work with, and they've already gotten to work signing Spicy Tuna, Liam O'Brien, to a 3 times $1 million bargain deal for the forward there. Also, Michael Kesselring coming back at 2 times $1.4 million. So they didn't expend any of the bank on those 2 guys, and so still in the 40s remaining there. They also have Joshua Brown and Travis McDermott, who will become UFAs. Their RFAs are Barrett Hayton, Sean Dursey. They traded JJ Moser away and Juuso Valimaki. I think Hayton and Dursey for sure we'll see as hockey club members next year, and the team probably prized to make the biggest moves here in the offseason after drafting Tej Iginla and Cole Bedoin in the first round.
Yeah, really accelerating what looked to be a rebuild. Either when they're in Arizona, looked to be a rebuild, and now it's over in Utah. They make that Sergachev trade. They make another trade with the New Jersey Devils to grab, I believe, Liam Marino, if I'm not mistaken. So, look, I mean, this team looks pretty good. Mike Kesselring, by the way, a former Northeastern Husky. I caught the final end of his tenure in my first year at Northeastern, so that's pretty cool. He gets that contract for them. But $43.2 million is a whole heck of a lot of cap space. That's by far the most we're going to see and talk about here in this episode. So, and I think knowing what we know about, Ryan Smith, the owner of the Utah Hockey Club, they want to make their splash and they want to do it quick. And I think that's what they're going to do. And it's not going to be a Seattle Kraken type situation, I don't think, because it's not an expansion team, obviously. So this team could be primed to make a big leap here first season. Do I expect them to make the playoffs? No, not necessarily, but they got Sergachev, a guy with some great playoff experience. They have the space to make more moves. It's just a question of, can they get players to come over to Utah and play with this new franchise? That, I think, is the biggest question.
And it's hard to understate how lucky that ownership group is to not have to go through the expansion rules, and they just inherit a team that's been at the bottom of the barrel and accruing
and has 2 top 24 picks
after top level draft pick after top level draft pick. And now all of those guys are ready to enter the league. and they've got all the cap space to make a huge deal, or with $40 million, 4 huge deals. You could
Yeah.
sign 4 of the top free agents for that money and still have room to work. Utah could be, imagine if they're a Vegas style, getting right into the playoffs and making a Stanley Cup run in year one. That's going to be exciting to watch, and might have to throw a Utah Hockey Club
Yeah.
jersey up behind me.
Wish they had a team name for their Stanley Cup run. Imagine the Utah Hockey Club winning the Stanley Cup. That would be something.
That would be it. That would be then they got to keep it at that point as well.
Yeah.
You're gonna be but they might not have a name, but those might be the coolest jerseys in the NHL right now. That color scheme is real
I
fresh.
like the
with
color scheme. Would love a logo. Then I'll be happy.
Right. On to Chicago, last place in the Central with just 52 points, second to last in the NHL. The second overall draft pick used to pick up defenseman Artem Levshinov, who will fit right in there on a power play someday with Connor Bedard. They also pick up Sasha Boisvert and Marek Vanacker, the only team with 3 first-round draft picks. Their UFAs: Colin Blackwell, Tyler Johnston, Jacob Megna, Jared Tenorti, and Nikita Zaitsev. RFAs: Anderson, Enwhistle, Johnson, and Radish. And another team with a lot of cap room, 14 out of 23 signed, 33.7 million to work with. And this is a team that, with the success Bedard had, he won the Calder, getting closer and closer, it feels like, to being back to relevance here, Colin.
Absolutely. And with every time I kind of watched a Bedard full season highlight clip, I kept thinking, man, if this guy had more finishers on his line, this highlight clip would be 10 more minutes long. And that's kind of where we're headed for Chicago. They got to get someone that can play with Bedard and work with the playmaking prowess, because Bedard's skill set is not just scoring, it's playmaking and it's creating. So they need to go out and make some moves. I was surprised when I saw that Demidov wasn't picked at second overall, but Levshinov still profiles to be a very strong player and defender for this Blackhawks team. But I think, the 3 first rounders, the way that things kind of broke out, I thought that the Blackhawks were, going to make some more moves. They made a couple to get back into the first round again, but I think there's still more to do. I don't know if they profile as a playoff team now, upcoming this season. Maybe it takes one more year. They're going to keep developing their prospects. Bedard's going to get that much better and that much stronger and that much bigger. So I think they have a trajectory to get where they want to go. I don't think the playoff window is open now. I think it's going to be open in a year or so.
We're into the closing section of our free agency frenzy super show here in the final division to work through on to the Pacific. Vancouver made a lot of noise and the greatest improvement of any team this year, finishing first in the Pacific after an abysmal season the previous year. 109 points this year, and now $12 million of cap space to work with. 19 of their 23 are signed right now. They get back Dakota Joshua, Teddy Bluger, Tyler Myers, and Philip Hronek, all signed here before potentially becoming UFAs. Joshua on an extremely team-friendly deal at 4 years times $3.25 million. Elias Lindholm will be going to free agency. He rejected, allegedly, a 7 times $7 million deal to stay in Vancouver. Bluger is a 2-year times $1.8 million deal. Tyler Myers 3 times $3 million, and Philip Hronek gets the extra year on an 8 times $7.25 million deal to stay right there alongside the captain, Quinn Hughes. The other free agents, other than Lindholm, Ian Cole, Nikita Zadorev, who has said he won't be coming back, and Casey DeSmith. They have RFA Artur Silovs, though, coming right up to fill DeSmith's spot.
Yeah, also of note for the Canucks, Northeastern Husky Aidan McDonough, they don't seem to be pursuing his contract, so he's going to be able to test up the open market. Obviously, McDonough was a huge part for me and for the Huskies over the past couple of years, was the former captain. That's neither here nor there. I think for the Canucks, in terms of their improvement, they have a lot that they need to keep retaining so they can keep that improvement. You mentioned this long list, a laundry list of guys in the UFA, but Philip Hronek getting signed and Myers and Bluger the same thing. I think Hronek getting signed at that 8-year contract, a little bit too rich for my blood, but he does bring a lot to this team and obviously to a blue line that needs it in Vancouver. And then you look up over at next year, there's some big names in Brock Besser and Nils Hoglander. So they're still going to be in a good spot. Will they be a 109-point team again? I don't think so, but with Elias Lindholm especially probably gonna leave, and with the 12 million in cap space. So this team is still going to be able to joust for the top of the Pacific or a wild card spot, but I don't think they're going to be a 109-point team again this year.
Brock Besser coming up in 2025. They'll have to keep an eye on that one, as well as Sutter Giuseppe, Juleson, and Friedman. But a great year for them. And again, if they can keep a lot of the main core there, hard to see them regressing too far out of the playoffs with the strength that their power play showed, especially if JT Miller and company and Pettersson coming back can continue to roll at the rate they did. The Stanley Cup runner-ups who finished second in the Pacific, the Edmonton Oilers with 104 points and a tough offseason, no longer with Kenny Holland as their GM. The GM spot has yet to be filled entering free agency. $9.78 million to deal with UFAs Connor Brown, Sam Carrick, Warren Foegele, Sam Gagner, Adam Henrique, Matthias Janmark, Corey Perry. They've signed Calvin Pickard to a 2 times $1 million deal, but still have to do Vincent Desharnais and Troy Stetcher. Their RFAs are Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg. The good news, it sounds like Leon Draisaitl is going to re-sign there. Draisaitl is a 2025 UFA. McDavid will be a 26 UFA. Derek Ryan and Cody Ceci are also up next year, although I doubt Ceci will be on much of a deal if he can't improve his performance from what happened in the playoffs. But some very interesting names on the UFAs there, especially after the playoff run, because if you think back to the end of the regular season, Connor Brown's a guy who you probably don't even bat your eyelashes at. You mentioned how he disappointed, and most of it due to injury with the Washington Capitals in an extremely disappointing offseason, or a regular season rather, with the Oilers until he hits the playoffs. And all of a sudden that ACL is starting to finally feel better. They say it takes about a year to recover from that injury as a hockey player, and we certainly saw it in the postseason there, where he was a key contributor to their Stanley Cup success. Warren Foegele, a disappointing playoff, kind of the reverse of Connor Brown there, but a great regular season and a very speedy guy that played an important part in their bottom six. And Adam Henrique, after being a trade target with Janmark and Brown, that line was lights out, especially shorthanded, where their penalty kill was almost as successful with just one more power play goal allowed to the amount of shorthanded goals that they scored.
Yeah, lots of names here, like you talked about, Casey. For Warren Foegele, I don't think he's going to stay at the price that he probably is going to want, which projects to be around $4 million. I think he's probably going to walk and get that somewhere else. Connor Brown, I think he'll stay. I mean, it's a little bit less in terms of contract for him than Foegele. You mentioned the regular season performance. That plays a big part in that. So I think he'll probably sign a team-friendly deal and stick around with Edmonton. And up and down, Corey Perry, I think the Oilers would love to sign him back. Maybe they don't want to because of the Corey Perry curse, but in his role, he did what he had to do and he was fine. He wasn't obviously the reason why Edmonton was losing in the Stanley Cup or lost in the Stanley Cup. So, it's none of the big guys here. It's not Bouchard, it's not Draisaitl, it's not McDavid yet. But of these names, there's a couple of guys I could definitely see staying. Brown is one of them. I think Henrique potentially, he's kind of in that murky area of this UFA list. And Troy Stetcher is another one of those murky players too. But they're going to get a couple of these guys back and they're going to be fine for next year. As long as they have McDavid, Draisaitl, they're good. They got Sam O'Reilly, 32nd overall, which was a good pick out of the OHL. Obviously, he's not going to be around for a couple more years, but I think this roster is going to be okay. Jack Campbell is another part of this where you kind of just forget about him because he was in the AHL all season and he wasn't playing well, but there's a lot of money locked up there as well.
Sam O'Reilly, they traded up for to get at the 32nd overall pick in the draft from London in the OHL. The LA Kings have been making a lot of noise in the trade market and got rid of Pierre-Luc Dubois, handing him off to the Washington Capitals. And in doing so, also got rid of a good list of their prospects that Winnipeg is extremely grateful for that mistake on the LA side. But they acquired Darcy Kemper on the goaltender side and also acquired Tanner Jeannot today during the second round of the draft. 99 points for them, third in the Pacific. The goaltending was up and down. Cam Talbot is a UFA this year, along with Victor Arvidsson, Trevor Lewis, and Matt Roy. On the RFA side, they'll have to figure out Quentin Byfield, Arthur Kaliev, Blake Lizotte, and Jacob Movari. Next year, it's Garikov, Englund, and David Riddick, who would have been a UFA this year, but has signed a one-year extension. And I think Riddick and Kemper could be a good enough goaltender tandem to at least get them once again into the playoffs, but maybe make a push to get over that hump. Hopefully for them, they don't have to run into the Edmonton Oilers, who is just about as big as the Corey Perry curse, is the LA losing to Edmonton. And not to the fault of LA, just an exceptionally good Edmonton team that they can't seem to get out of that first round matchup, just like the Leafs in Boston.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't think Darcy Kemper's a bad goaltender. I just don't think things worked out in Washington with him. I mean, he won a Stanley Cup with Colorado. The stats weren't amazing, but he still got it done. So maybe a change of scenery is going to be good for him. By all accounts, he's really excited to restart his career in LA, and he'll probably be, if not a 1A, 1B situation, he'll be the starting goaltender in Los Angeles. So I think he's going to be fine there. He's probably going to be more successful than he was here in DC. But on the free agent side, you got to expect Byfield's going to get a contract, or at the very least stay in LA for a long period of time. Lizotte, I expect the same thing. Kaliev, potentially, just my thoughts on that. And then the UFAs, I think they try and bring Victor Arvidsson back. The price may be too high for them, but they got $22.3 million in the cap. This is a guy that has produced for them. And, they're not trying to blow up the system, obviously, that worked for a 99-point season this past year. So I think that they're in a good spot here with Kemper coming in. I think he's going to be successful, like I said, and I think this team's going to be pretty successful this year.
$22.3 million to work for Todd McClellan out as the head coach, Jim Hiller in for the LA Kings to try to tighten up that team that was right there this year in the playoffs. They pick up Liam Greentree from Windsor in the OHL with the 26th overall pick in the draft. The Vegas Golden Knights, a team always making noise, and they seem to be getting rid of the original misfits, the last one standing, Jonathan Marchessault, after being the team's leading scorer, did not get a deal as they go ahead and sign some of the guys they brought in at the trade deadline. Noah Hannafin, one of the big ones that really sealed the deal that Marchessault wasn't going to have enough money to come back. He's joined by Michael Amadio, William Carrier, Anthony Mantha, Steven Chandler, and Alec Martinez, who are all UFAs. Vegas has just $1.2 million to work with, and 20 of their 23 spots are filled going into this year. They pick up Trevor Connolly in the draft, 19th overall from Tri-City in the USHL, a guy who's had some off-ice trouble, but touts a lot of talent, and that caused him to drop down in the draft, but could be a very worthy pick for Kelly McCrimmon and the Vegas Golden Knights.
Yeah, this Golden Knights team is pretty solidified down the middle. They're pretty solidified defensively. Even with the goaltending trade, they're pretty solidified with Aiden Hill and net. The issue with them is and has been on the wing, with only a couple of players under contract, one being Mark Stone in the wing position. So do they go and try and get, sign a Duclair like we talked about? Do they make a big blockbuster for Sam Reinhart or Tara Vinen potentially, who projects to be around $6.8 million? That's his evolving hockey contract projection. Or do they try and swing a deal for Mitch Marner, right? Like the Knights have the potential to do all of this with all that we've talked about. They're not shy when it comes to doing blockbuster deals. The cap space obviously is going to be a little bit of a tricky situation with the 1.2 million like we talked about, but they've been able to kind of skirt things before. And I think if it comes to a Mitch Marner deal, and you're going to have to get rid of Marchessault to make that happen, obviously, but we expect that to happen. I think Chandler Stevenson, the same kind of thing. So I think there's a lot of things that can happen, even though the roster is pretty much full and the cap is pretty low. I think the Golden Knights can still make some moves here and make some splashes going into next year.
Craig Conroy, after his first full year with the Calgary Flames, has $29 million to work with and has made some big moves going back to last year, getting Sharon Govich at the draft. He'll be a UFA next year. This year, he picked up Andrei Kuzmenko at the deadline in the trade with Vancouver. And this year, his only UFAs are AJ Greer, Dennis Gilbert, and Oliver Killington. Dustin Wolf, their big prospect goaltender, is an RFA. They got rid of Markstrom. So in the retool that they're calling it, we'll see if Wolf is going to be the guy to bring them around at goaltender, but plenty of cap space to work with. They picked up Kevin Ball in the recent trade, and Zane Parekh from Saginaw with the 9th overall pick. Could be a guy who steps right into the lineup, a top 10 guy that maybe needs one more year of experience, but also it doesn't hurt in a team that's rebuilding to give a guy a year of NHL experience. And interested to see what they can do here in the offseason with some money to be able to move for some bigger long-term deals. And Craig Conroy here in his after his first full year, now with the reins of the team, he's done quite a bit. I've been extremely impressed with some of the moves they've made, not only to get rid of those guys that are on expiring deals that didn't want to be there, but to bring in huge loads back for each of those deals.
Absolutely. And the Mangiapane deal is one of those, they got a second round pick next year for that. And, if it's a long-term deal, if it's not, I still think they're going to find a way to get some of these guys that we've already talked about here today in terms of free agency. I think they do what they can to keep on to goalie prospect Dustin Wolf, who's projected to be, a starter going forward, at least has the skill set for that. If it's with the Flames or if it's with somebody else, on defense, Tyson Barrie, Matt Dumba, guys that they could sign for maybe shorter term deals and kind of be stopgaps for the younger players that are coming up for Calgary. But if there is a big swing to be made here, would it be, Dumba a long-term deal or Shane Gossespierre a long-term deal, things like that for Calgary. So I'm interested to see what they end up doing. I don't know if this is the year that they swing out for the long-term deals. Maybe that happens next season. But after 81 points, I think they're going to go up here. I don't think they're facing down. I think they're on an upward trajectory. 9th overall, Zane Parekh. I like the draft pick. There are reports that it was going to be TJ Ginla. That didn't come to pass. So, I mean, the draft went pretty well, and I think so far the free agency is going pretty well for them too. The 2025, there's a lot of names on there in terms of free agents, so they're going to have to be careful with that as well.
Seattle, a team that went in the wrong direction this year, 81 points, 6th in the Pacific after knocking off the Stanley Cup defending champions in the Colorado Avalanche the year previous. Dave Hackstall, after 2 seasons, is fired. Dan Bilesma, now the new head coach there. Their UFAs, just 3 of them, Pierre-Edouard Bellemare, Thomas Tatar, and Justin Schultz. They have RFAs, Matty Beniers, Eli Tolvanen, and Kyler Yamamoto. So some young talent. They also add Berkeley Catton in the first round with the 8th overall pick. Next year, the UFAs, Yanni Gord, Tanev Larson, Dumoulin, and Borgen that they'll have to deal with. $23.4 million of cap space, though a team right now that doesn't have any star-studded talent. Maybe they use that money to try to go out and get a certified scorer, get a stud defenseman to add to Vance Dunn, someone that can work the power play with him. But they need to find something, because right now with the roster they have, it's tough for any coach to get that team to compete with a team like the list of names that's on a Florida Panthers team or a Connor McDavid-led Edmonton Oilers team.
Yeah, definitely they need to make some ads. I think one guy that I could see being a good fit, Jake DeBrusk, who we talked about for the Boston Bruins, he's going to be testing free agency. Evolving Hockey has his projection at around 5.8 million, which the Kraken can make that happen. And this is a guy that is consistent. He's always healthy. He's always out there on the ice. These two parties have been linked together since February. So I think this could really happen in terms of the rest of the positions. Victor Arvidsson on the wing as well. We talked about Chandler Stevenson could be And I think, Shane Wright's going to come in and he's going to take up one of the roster spots for the Kraken. I think Matty Beniers is going to get whatever he needs to get to stay for this season. Maybe he gets a little bit more for a longer term deal. Then you look forward, right? Brandon Tanev, Yanni Gord, those are guys that have been with the team for a long time. Obviously, do they try and hold on to them as well? The Kraken, you said they went down. 23.4 million is a lot of money. They got to play this right. They got to execute here in their free agency and get things done in that sense. A lot of young talent, like you said. I think DeBrusk would be a really good fit here on the wing.
The Anaheim Ducks have no free agents this year. Next year, Frank Vetrano is the only free agent. They'll have 2 RFAs in Cogliano and Dostal. Next year, their RFAs this year are Benoit Olivier Gru, Max Jones, Brett Liaison, Isaac Lundestrom, Jackson Lacombe, Gustav Lindstrom, and Urbo Vakanainen. A team that had quite a few draft picks this year. They stunned the world, basically, the hockey world at least, with Beckett Seneke, the Oshawa OHL 3rd overall pick, who was translated to go around 13th, and even he was stunned when his name got called number 3. They also ended up getting Stian Solberg, the Norwegian, at the 23rd overall pick. But a lot of rumblings around this Anaheim Ducks team about what they could do. Trevor Zegras maybe on the move, but 59 points last season, 7th in the Pacific, and a team in the midst of a rebuild. Tough to see them improving very much this year with such a young roster unless they really go out and make some huge moves. The only good news is they have that $33.3 million to work with.
Yeah, they could make some big moves. I don't really think there's going to be a splash here, Casey. I just don't. The one exciting thing, I'm excited to see what, Leo Carlson and Cutter Gauthier can do together this season. You talked about the young talent with Lucas Dostal as well, and Trevor Zegras. If he does stay, he's still young and he is talented, so he's a young talent. So I think Gauthier, I'm excited to see for a full NHL season. I've seen him at BC for a couple of years now in Hockey East, so that at least the Ducks have something going for them. But 59 points, maybe they make a 8 to 10 point jump. Maybe they get up to the mid 70s, best case scenario, but still things are not upward facing just yet. I think it's still going to take a few years for them. And they have a whole heck of a lot of, really young, really high talented players. Mason McTavish is another one of those. They just need to get more time, get more reps in the NHL. And I think the Ducks will be fine in a few years.
We close out the free agency super show with the San Jose Sharks after a 47-point season and through 20 games, a team that was rumored to potentially be the worst team in NHL history. They fortunately went on to beat that mark, but 8th in the Pacific, 32nd in the NHL. They are another team with a massive amount of cap space, $30.4 million to work with. And how about this? Only 5 players in the entire organization have contracts that will be remaining longer than the 2024-25 season. Their UFAs this year: Bailey, Barabanov, Carpentier, Hoffman, LeBlanc, McDonald, and Devin Cooley, who they traded for with the Buffalo Sabres at the deadline. RFAs, they acquired the rights to Ty Dellandrea, and they have Granstrom, Kunin, Studnicka, Zdanov, and Addison. Next year, the UFAs will be Granlund, Nico Sturm, who I assume will not be a Shark by the end of the year, Smith, Ruda, Nizov, and Blackwood. Their RFAs will be Costin and Zetterlund. They pick up Macklin Celebrini, who is expected to transform the franchise. I expect we'll see that if Celebrini decides to make the move to the NHL as one of those Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday night opening week matchups with the Chicago Blackhawks this year. They also get Sam Dickinson from London, and they traded up from 14th to 11th to grab him in the first round of the draft. And maybe not this coming year, but I can see in the very near future, I think the San Jose Sharks are a team that's not only going to be in the playoffs, but maybe 5 years down the road could be making some very deep runs here. They say they're not signing anyone to long-term deals, and that's where you see only 5 players that are going to be around,
Yeah.
or at least around on the same deal in the next 2 years. They said even this year when they go out, they want to grab some big name veterans to put with the likes of Will Smith and Celebrini if he decides to go, but they don't want to sign him on more than 3-4 years for that reason, that with the idea of this being a rebuild, retool, they think they can get there pretty quick. And with those short contracts, they can keep signing bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah, I think on the Celebrini side, I was reading about this because, I have a vested interest in him going back to BU or not as a Northeastern guy covering the Northeastern Huskies. So, it's interesting because if he goes back to BU, he's going to dominate the NCAA again. He's going to dominate Hockey East again. And, will there be some development? Yeah, I mean, playing with Jay Pandolfo and with the BU Terriers, there will be. But I was reading, I think the best thing for him, and this is I'm trying to be as unbiased as possible here, but I think the best thing for him is to go straight to the NHL because he already had that year at BU where he was the best player, one of the best players in the NCAA, the best freshman by a long shot, and also he's going to have the chance to play with Will Smith here basically immediately, right? Maybe it'll take a couple of weeks to get there, but if he does, that'll be big for development. That'll be big for what should be the core of this team for the next few years, the next long term. So I think Celebrini should go, and overall, like it's going to be a big challenge, and that's kind of what development is all about, right? So it is up to him, whatever he's most comfortable with. He's kind of gone back and forth about it, which I find very interesting. But overall, like the Sharks team, are they going to be a 90-point team next year? No, like they're not supposed to be, but it should be like a pretty exponential curve in terms of growth for them when Celebrini and Smith start playing together, when they get some of their other young guys like Sam Dickinson, who they just picked in the mix. Like this team should be pretty good in the next couple of years. The rebuild seems to be going along as expected right now.
I'm right with you on the Celebrini front. I don't see any reason why you would send him back, especially with the Sharks organization. I would think they would have some pull to bring him right up with Will Smith announcing that he's going to go this year. You might as well take him at the same time so they can be a McDavid Draisaitl type combo. But man, it's a hockey hotbed that you're sitting in there in the Boston area. And I've been following extremely closely with the NTDP guys just because had the opportunity to announce their game when we played an exhibition against them. And I'm looking right now at the line chart here, and guys that you're going to have to sit against, whether it's BU or BC, for that bean pot, it's not going to be too easy with BU. Imagine that. I was thinking about this as well because I'm a huge Yzerman fan, and thinking that Celebrini could go back to BU, it would be Celebrini alongside guys that were line mates this year in Camille Bednarik, who got drafted, Cole Yzerman, who's a first rounder, Cole Hudson, who's going there this year as well. And then if you can't get over that hump, you're going to have to play against the Boston College Eagles there. And they have Teddy Stiga, who's a top liner on the development team, drafted. James Hagan, who's going to get drafted probably number 1 overall next year coming up. He's not old enough to be drafted even yet. And on the defensive end, they're adding Will Skahan. And they're
holding on to Ryan Leonard too this year. So like
you're right.
I mean, both of those teams are going to be insane. Again, I'm not going to be around, at least as a Northeastern student, for this upcoming Bean Pot. So I won't be broadcasting those games for my student radio, but it'll be a true fight. We got our Bean Pot win last year against BU, so I'm holding my hat to that one right now.
That wraps up all of the teams here, Colin. So I'll let you throw a shot in the dark here. If you had to pick one crazy dark horse move that's going to make people spit out their water when it comes over the radio waves, what are you throwing the dart blindfolded at the neighbor's wall? If you had to put one out to the hockey gods to try to throw it out there.
It's got to be Stamkos related. I think that's kind of where my mind immediately goes when I hear this. I'll throw you a bone. I don't even know if this is financially possible. I'll say Stamkos to the Hurricanes.
Oh, I would not mind that one at all. I think mine's going to be Carolina Hurricanes related as well. I got 2 in mind, and we kind of talked about it earlier, but it seems pretty likely Brett Pesce is going to be a New Jersey Devil. I think the Devils are moving the cap to try to get Brady Shea with them, and keep that duo a second pair that is absolutely lights out. You get Shea as a power play guy. They already stole Dougie Hamilton from the Carolina Hurricanes, and when he's been healthy, we've seen what he can do. He got him right to the playoffs in his first year as a Devil. I think they go with Pesce and Shea, and I also think that Marty Necas I have on the move, and I could see him as a fit with the Boston Bruins. I know Vancouver was pretty in on him, but I think Necas to the Bruins could be a potential trade we have coming up here in the next couple of weeks. I also think Gensel is on the move, and I'm going to do the reverse of what you just did. Stamkos to the Hurricanes for you. I'm going to send Gensel down to the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Nice.
Colin, it's baseball season for you and not too much hockey going on, fortunately. So you're heading out to the Diamond here. And for those who want to hear more of your voice here, ESPN Plus is where to catch you. What's the schedule for the next 15 days here is now the Fifth Liners podcast gets to kick the feet up. And we're going to keep the episodes coming all summer long here. Now we're transitioning into bringing the guests on, but the plan is for the next 2 months here, every 2 weeks, we're going to drop an episode, which means 2 weeks of baseball to listen to as we are Colin Kapoor fan club here. What's the schedule going on with the Rafters?
So we got a bunch of stuff coming up. The first half ends tomorrow. If you're listening to this on Sunday, it ends today. But recording here on Saturday, it ends tomorrow on Sunday, June 30th. And then we have an entire second half of baseball to get to. Next 14 days, I think I probably have 8 games. So you can catch me on ESPN Plus, on the Northwoods League Sports Network. If you follow me on Twitter at Colin Kapoor, you'll get all of that, all of those details and more. Looking forward to closing out the summer strong, closing out the first half and getting into the second half strong. Then we get into the fall, we get into hockey season, and that's what it's all about.
I've always admired the ECHL, especially the newer franchises in the ECHL, for having some of the greatest names in sports, in my opinion, with the Ghost Pirates and the Swamp Rabbits, the Everblades Solar Bears. And I think the Northwoods League might have that beat. I saw Doc Spiders was on there. If you're the GM of your franchise, where are you going with for your team name?
Oh my goodness, that's putting me on the spot right here. The Doc Spiders is who we're playing today and who we're playing tomorrow. I'd go with something like some kind of monster from Legend, something like that. Maybe like, I feel like everything's kind of been used by now, but maybe like like Kraken would be what I would go with, but that already exists. God, let me think. I'll do this. So when the Washington football team was saying they're like they were setting out a poll for their like new team name, my idea was the Washington Prime, and then it would be sponsored by Amazon. So that would be my new team, would be the Washington Prime, and then we'd be sponsored by Amazon.
My hockey career is starting this week here, and I guess it's a week from now as this podcast drops. On Monday the 8th, our adult league team, the Frosty Flamingos, is in action.
Oh, nice.
My vote got vetoed. I was the Tundra Turtles was the team name I had picked out. But
pretty good.
But buddy, we're rooting for you here, and go Rafters. I'll be tuned in for sure. And for all the fans out there, make sure to check out Northwoods Baseball with the greatest student baseball commentator out there who's well into the pro ranks now on his way up, Colin Kapoor. Colin, thanks for joining along here. For everybody who's been tuned in, right around July 15th is the plan for our next episode, and a list of guests coming out this summer that we're extremely excited to welcome on. Big congratulations to episode 3's guest, Christian Humphreys, the latest draft pick of the Colorado Avalanche. If you haven't caught on to that one, go check out his interview on YouTube and Spotify. But that does it for us here. We've made it through our first free agency frenzy super show, and credit to Colin, who somehow still has his voice left here. Colin, it's been a pleasure. Stuck with you for about 2 hours here, and thanks for hanging in with me.
Yeah, thanks, Casey. Looking forward to what we have planned for the rest of the summer. It's going to be a lot of fun. And then we get into the grit of things when the fall comes around, when the NCAA and the NHL starts. That's when we're going to start having some real fun here on the podcast. Can't wait for that, and can't wait for the rest of the summer.
That does it for episode 4. Until next time, you've been listening to the Fifth Liners podcast. Again, make sure to like and subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. All it does is help our ratings and help us bring this show to you. Check us out also on Instagram and TikTok at Fifth Liners Pod. And again, until next time, thanks for tuning on, and we'll see you in about 15 days.